All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started. My name is Trevor Drake. I'm with the Great Plains Institute. We are supporting the state with facilitating these meetings of the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change. We're all back together since June was the last meeting, so we're really see everybody here. So I think we're going to kick things off by doing a round of intros. Then I'll hand it over to the commissioners to give us a welcome, and then I think we'll be able to get the agenda on screen. Take a look at that, and then we'll be on. So let's just do name and organization, starting here with Pat.
Pat Luneman, dairy farmer from Todd County.
Mike Birkland, rural northern Minnesota resident with Beltrami Electric now, and when I first started out with council, First Industries and timber producer.
Dave Sunderman, Benco Electric Cooperative out of Mankato.
Ann Mulholland, the Nature Conservancy in Minnesota.
Chris Clark with Excel Energy in Minnesota.
Grace Arnold, I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Commerce.
I'm Katrina Kessler. I'm the Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency.
I'm Hilda Martinez, and I'm a climate consultant.
And Mike Nierman, I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Gillette Children's.
Eric Dayton with ASCO Finlayson.
Kevin Pramis with Leona, Minnesota, North Dakota.
And for folks online, I want to check audio for Marco and Wayne. Marco, do we have you? Do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Marco Hernandez. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm the Policy Director for Tending the Soil.
Wonderful. And loud and clear. Thank you. And Wayne, do we have you?
Good afternoon, Wayne Dupuy. I'm the Environmental Program Manager for the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa.
Great, welcome. And then we have a number of state staff online. If you'd like to just introduce yourself in the chat, that would be wonderful. And for folks in the room, we're working on getting the visual adjustment. We can't see the visual. And then let's do intros of folks who are here.
Alyssa Bemis, Great Plains Institute.
Amy Ward, Great Plains Institute.
Peter Tester, the Deputy Commissioner of the PCA.
John Jaske, Executive Director, Board of Water and Soil Resources.
Amanda Jarrett Smith, the Climate Unit Supervisor at the Pollution Control Agency.
And Peter Brickwoody, Assistant Commissioner at the Commerce Department.
All right, thanks everybody. So I think at this point
Hey, Trevor.
Yeah, Frank.
Yeah, we also have Joe Burkholz from the Governor's Office on the teams. If we can give Joe a moment to introduce himself.
Yeah, Joe, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Pardon me, I have a cold, so I sound really terrible, but I'm Joe Burkholz, Policy Advisor covering environment, climbing, mining, and IRRR issues in the Governor's Office. Looking forward to, I think this is the first one of these that I've been able to attend, but looking forward to working with you all.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to hand it over to Commissioners Arnold and Kessler to welcome you all.
All right, so thanks, everybody. I'm hopefully, can you hear? There, okay. Really excited to be here. So we have a good agenda today. This is the first time that we've all been in person since we rolled out the climate framework, the climate action framework. So I think that would be a good moment to be able to celebrate what we've done over the last 4 years and then talk a little bit about what the next 4 years looks like. I just want to say that this has been super fun to be able to get to know all of you in this time and to hear all of your perspectives. I will have, more of that to come. But I think, you can see in the climate action framework all of the perspectives and the values that you've brought to the work so far. And I think we have a real opportunity to sort of champion that. And I know you all are doing that now. So I'm really excited about the work today. I should say Frank is online and is joining us from Germany and has been helping to orchestrate this whole thing. So big kudos to him as well. Yeah, I think that we're going to have a really great set of discussions.
Yeah. So this is Katrina, and I'll just add to what Commissioner Arnold said. you can see on the goals of the agenda, obviously what she talked about, celebrating the climate action framework. We're going to provide an update on implementation at the state as far as what we've been doing since we launched the framework, what we're hoping to do through the budget process and the strategic planning process, the legislative session, and working to identify what we can be doing together, because we would love to have strong partnerships from you all as we advocate for the good work in the framework that reflects lots of your input and thousands of others. And then thinking about how we can work collectively as a advisory council in partnership with the state and bringing your ideas to the work that we can do for the next 4 years and what that organization structure looks like and how do we memorialize that. So if we can get through all of that, we will have been successful. Those are the goals that we have today. I think the next thing is Amanda is going to give us an update. Is that right?
That's right. And we're just working on being able to get access to the slides here in the room. So maybe just adding on to what the commissioner said, you can think of our agenda as really 2 parts today. So the first part is updates on what's happened since our last meeting, and second part will be discussion now that. And just a logistics note, the folks online can only hear us if we're speaking into a microphone. So we'll pass around the mics. Amanda, how are we doing?
So I have the slides up and sharing, but I think from what I can tell, we're not able to see it in the room. Is that correct?
That's correct, Frank.
And as Amanda pulls it up, I will note that one of the things that we're hoping to get from all of you today is how you would like to work with us, if at all, on advertising the opportunities in the framework, outreach and engagement around the framework. We have been getting invitations and soliciting invitations from people who might want to be hearing about the work of the state and how that touches or intersects with their work. Amanda and Helen Walkew, who's the tribal liaison, and I have been to schools. I think people are going to community groups. If you have association meetings that you attend, hopefully everybody sees themselves in some element of this. And we can't be everywhere, and we are not always the most effective spokespeople. I would argue that many of you and your positions bring a more powerful force to the messages and to the advertisements of the opportunities in the framework. So one of the things that I want to talk about as we go through what's in highlights of the framework is if you see yourself in a role of sharing that and how we can be supportive of you. Our communications folks have now put together like canned versions of a 10-minute presentation, 15-minute presentation, a 20-minute presentation. And so we would be happy to share those, have no pride in ownership. All of this belongs to the collective and provide you talking points. And it should be fairly painless to be engaged in the outreach, and that's something. Yeah, another way to do this, everybody individually joins or shares the computer with a neighbor and who is joined, then you, as Frank has said, if everybody online can see it and we in the room cannot, it's quite possible that I'm happy to share my join the meeting. Everybody individually joins or shares the computer. Get someone. Yeah, but nobody has the link who's in. So we need to share the link. The team, those of us who are here.
To the presentation, is that what you're asking for the link for?
For the Teams meeting, Frank.
Yes, I can provide that. Do you need it sent to someone in particular?
Yeah, everyone who is
Yeah.
on the council.
Yeah,
Grace
Frank,
and I.
we're trying to get Sean back right now, but we can't see the presentation in the room at all. So we're going to try to log on to computers, but no one has.
Okay, I'll send that momentarily.
Thank you.
Good that Frank's supporting.
Okay, I just sent the link to everyone on the advisory council and to Commissioners Kessler and Commissioner Arnold. Hopefully you see that in a moment. And just so everyone knows, when you're using the microphone, make sure to hold it up close and keep it there to make sure that the audio stays good for the people on the hybrid team. Yes, so if you are in the room and joining the Teams meeting, make sure you turn your speakers and microphones off. Mute all your speakers, turn your microphones off. We'll use the room set up for that.
All right, Amanda, do you want to? Like Ann, like Rick, Kevin.
Finalizing. Lucinda, do you want to? I saw you joined. Do you want to just say hello to everyone?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm out in California, way out in the countryside, and my internet connection is very tenuous. So I will say hi to everyone and then turn off my video and microphone.
All right. Thank you all for your patience and working with us on the technology front. We thought we knew how it all worked, but apparently not. I'm Amanda Jarrett Smith. I think we've met most of you before, but I'm just going to provide a little bit of an update on we met back in June, I think it was, and heard all of your input on the action framework. And then we went back to our teams and took all of that input and revised the framework and published it in September. And so I wanted to kind of catch you up a little bit, highlight a few things that we did based specifically on your input in that time. We do have an entire document that is published on our website that documents all of the things that many of the things that we did to update the framework based on public input. But we're just going to highlight a few key things today. So I think that the big thing that you're probably aware of is that we did, as part of the Climate Action Framework, adopt new targets to align us with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This was something that we had a lot of discussion about here. It was something that we heard a lot from the public as well as many of the work groups. And so within the framework, we are saying that we are striving to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and invest in the resilience that we need, especially prioritizing the next 10 years when it can have the most impact. And the framework, within the framework, we're really trying to contextualize this as well, that it's not something that the state can do alone. We need to be doing it in partnership with others, other governments, businesses, nonprofits, and individuals. And it aligns us also with other states, the federal government, with many tribes and other nations as well. Another larger new content section that you'll find in the framework is our What's Next section. Again, something that we really heard from you all as well as others is that folks wanted to see that this framework was really leaning towards action and leading us into action. And so, you know, we wanted to kind of help make that transition and help show that this is not an end to our work, but really just an important milestone, and help folks see how those things are going to play into each other. So within this section, it does a number of things. It talks about how we will engage with folks. It talks about measuring and reporting on progress. And then it also talks about that each of the action steps in the framework have a different path to implementation. Some might be things that need to go through the legislature. Some might be things that individual state agencies might be able to do, or things that we're already doing and we really need to just amplify. And so trying to kind of capture that range and also help people kind of understand that there's no one path to implement the framework. And then let's see, we also kind of talk in that portion about some pillars of what will guide our action. So what are the things that will have the biggest impact on reducing emissions and building resiliency? What are the things that will advance equity and help us strive towards that clean economy? And what will advance public health and environmental health as well. And then we highlight a few key priority actions that we're planning to move forward on or initiate in the next 12 to 18 months, kind of grouped by different categories. So some are ongoing priorities, things that we've already been talking about at the legislature or with our stakeholders that we want to continue working on. Some foundational steps. I think one of the things that we heard from a lot of the work groups was that we need to get some better data in some of our areas. So really wanting to kind of dig into that in the next year or so. Leveraging federal action, the framework is going to guide our thinking on as the federal funds, the large quantities of federal funds that are going to start flowing to states in the coming months, using the framework to prioritize that work, that funding. And then advancing some key policy areas. So I'm just going to walk through a few. Oops, I went backwards, but here we are. So a few other things from the input that I wanted to highlight. So we updated a lot of the measures of progress. Something that we heard from you all was that we needed to be stronger and clearer and more quantifiable, including baseline years. So we went through and tried to do that for many of the measures. We reviewed and updated the language around centering communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change. They added content. I think one of the things that we talked about a lot in June was that a lot of these things are interconnected. And so we tried to provide some language in the introductory sections to help connections. And then also adding and clarifying some definitions that some of the work groups had challenges with. So pulling a few key things out of each of the chapters, in the draft we had just kind of a general measure of progress to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We did include a proposed 20% per capita vehicle miles traveled reduction by 2050 which is in line with MnDOT's statewide multimodal transportation plan. And then trying to contextualize that, that it's about providing options for more options for how to get around. The Climate Smart Natural Working Land section, we tried to kind of clarify the different roles and opportunities for both natural lands and working lands. There's such diversity of our landscapes and so many different opportunities there. Trying to kind of tease out some of those different roles and opportunities. In our Resilient Communities chapter, trying to again kind of tease out clarity around the providing tools and funding for local communities, both urban and rural, and really kind of trying to emphasize that it's based on local needs, local priorities, and then some strength and focus around community tree canopy. Within clean energy and efficient buildings, one of the things that was really highlighted in this group and also the work groups, again, was addressing energy affordability and access, both on the energy supply side, but then also in our buildings and making our buildings efficient and affordable. And then emphasis on reliability. So we tried to kind of thread that throughout that chapter, the reliability of our grid. Within Healthy Lives and Communities, I think this group had a good conversation around that, health is everything, as kind of is climate. And so needing to walk the line of helping folks see kind of the range of health connections with climate change without it kind of becoming too overly broad. And then within Clean Economy, we talked about kind of some specificity around supporting an active transition to the clean economy, so developing that workforce plan. And then we wanted to bring up the concepts around clean innovation and kind of an innovative clean economy. And so we created a new initiative to raise that up within the structure of the chapter. That's just kind of a high-level overview. We're happy to answer some questions. And I think I was going to talk a little bit about some of the engagement stuff, but Commissioner Kessler already hit on that. So I think I will just turn it back to you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Questions from any of the council members? Maybe you covered it so well that there are no questions. Satisfied.
So how about thoughts on engagement? And here.
I can help move microphone.
Oh, actually, I have one question about, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. One question about the framework. Where we added a goal, like I think it was after the 20 transportation, how does that tier up to the overall goals? And is there any attempt in doing that? And the answer may be no. I'm just curious because we adopted the overall goals. You articulated that the transportation goal fed into the DOT's recommendations, but does that at all touch on, feed into, and then?
In other words, do the subsector goals add up to the overall goal?
And the answer is they don't. They do not necessarily add up all the way to that kind of end target, but they'll help us kind of track in these, within the narrower pieces there, how much we're getting towards those overall goals, but they don't necessarily stack all the way to that 2050 goal.
And Frank is more eloquently able to articulate this, but I can say that since the passage of the IRA, we are able to get a lot further than we thought we would, even with what we have in the framework. So I don't know that we know exactly where that is, but it's a lot further than we would have been otherwise. So we're working on the math behind that, and that's part of the ongoing effort across the agencies and that we'll have to do with partners. But I'm very excited to be able to leverage those opportunities.
Yeah, I'll jump in here and say that there are at least three national groups that have been looking at the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act on both the national emissions inventory and projections, but some of those are starting to downscale those to the individual states. We will be digging into those more specifically once we are done with our next emissions inventory report here shortly, and looking at that so we can find out which one of those estimates works better for us. And we are also working with EPA, who also received $250 million to provide to states and municipalities and tribal nations in order to do some additional greenhouse gas reduction planning. And we would like to use those kinds of funds to supplement our work in the next year or two in order to answer those kinds of questions, but in particular with the context of the Inflation Reduction Act being added to it. And the high level statement is that essentially the Inflation Reduction Act can get us to a 40% reduction by 2030. And the nationally determined goals are 50%. So we're all going to be looking for that addition to what can happen. But then it is different on a national basis than on each individual state, and that's what we'll be digging into soon.
Other questions from folks, or anything you might be wondering about? Obviously it's been a while since we've met, and there's a lot in the framework. So even if we didn't present on something, but you have a question, is this in here? How did the state address this issue? Folks are happy to take those questions now.
I just had a question on the impact of the legislative election outcomes of this past cycle, and whether there's any thought of adjusting framework based on what's possible, that perhaps that's on the implementation side. Does that perhaps accelerate implementation timelines body, but also what, if any, impact you see?
Sure. So I can, I'll take the goal question first, because we had quite a robust discussion about whether the IPCC, I think. I don't think the answer to that has changed. That's the best answer that we have from the scientific community as the goals forward. So I think that is still kind of what we're looking to, at a high level. Those goals haven't changed. I do think that what can come up for discussion or might come up for discussion is likely to change. And we're talking about the 100% by 2040 goal, which has been in our department's legislative proposal package for a long time. It didn't have a lot of traction before, and there's a lot of discussion about that now. So I think, for topics like that, there may be more kind of oomph behind them. There may be others where there are, another set of folks who are coming in who have different thoughts. And so one thing that my team reminds me is that regardless of what we're trying to do, about 30% of the legislature is new. So there's a whole lot of education as well. So I think the answer to the goal question is the goals haven't changed. What's possible has changed. There's also a whole lot of kind of shaking out that I think needs to happen. And as that happens, then, I think being partners with you all in what can and should need legislative kind of intervention will be really important.
And I'll add and say, we launched the framework with all of you prior to the election because it was ready to go, and it's important, and it's the work that needs to happen regardless of who wins elections. And I think we are committed to that. We'll talk about implementation. We would have been doing implementation regardless. I think we want to be working with whoever wants to work with us on that. And now I think there are probably more people who want to work with us on it. So that's great. And I think there's going to be higher expectations on all of us now to go faster and to seize the opportunities that are presented, not only with the publication of the framework, but also with the Inflation Reduction Act and with the energy that others are bringing to this. So I think you're going to see strong proposals coming out of the governor's office, and you're going to see strong proposals coming out of the House and the Senate. And some people will say that it's harder to work together when you have more money than less money. And maybe that's the problem we have, but I think it's a really excellent opportunity to bring all of you and your neighbors to the Capitol to help us figure that out. So maybe we should transition to implement. Others have questions.
Yeah, other questions just about the framework in general? Being none. And I think we'd like to do just an update on implementation. I will just maybe make a note of celebration that the framework has been published. And thanks to all of you on the council. There were folks in the council who chaired work groups that met many times, lots of external stakeholders that were involved. Exciting that has happened and that we're
I just want to echo what Trevor said. One of the things that's been really nice about being able to, about, the conversations that we've had about the framework are that we can say not only that, 3,000 Minnesotans contributed to it, but that we had an advisory council that has a diverse set of perspectives that was really working alongside us. And so I think that it has been made the framework like much better, but also is a nice way to be able to say, this isn't just an administration thing, it's kind of an all of us thing. And so I just want to underscore Trevor's congratulations to everyone, but also how valuable this group's input was in creating that and rolling it out. And I'm also somewhat stalling for Katrina so she can get
Okay, well, so I will see if I can share the slides that are about implementation and the budget. Hey, Sean, can you help me figure? I do it. So Sean, I'm interested in this one. So. This one, yep. Okay, thank you. All right, great. Okay, so just bigger. There we go. So you heard Amanda talk about implementation that's ongoing, and I think that's important to emphasize. The work of the state and our local partners and the tribes, we were doing climate work and we will continue to do climate work, and a number of the things that we wanted to make sure that people heard about, because I think a lot of you touch these areas as well, which are highlighted in the framework, are ongoing. So things like the Green Step cities and making sure that we are using the most up-to-date data and effective in the way we share data, and continue to supporting things like community tree planting and preservation, as well as continuing to push for electricity generation transitions, which we were already doing. So the framework does set us on a more aggressive and bold path in many of these areas, but all this work was underway prior to the publication of the framework and prior to the preparation of the budget. So one of the things, okay, one of the things that I want to talk about, the governor has a strategic plan that he refers to as the One Minnesota Plan. And the areas that showed up in the first Walz-Flanagan strategic plan were economic opportunities for children and family, equity and inclusion, being measurable and accountable, and then making sure that we're protecting and improving the environment. And the plan is to update the One Minnesota Plan. So each agency will have to think about their work and how it rolls up to the next version of the One Minnesota Plan. And we've already begun conversations with the governor and the governor's staff on how to reflect the climate action framework and the goals we have around climate in a new version of the One Minnesota plan. And so this kind of gets at where Ann was going. We know we have a lot of work to do on greenhouse gas mitigation. We previously had a target, which is still in statute, of the next generation energy goal. We have set in the climate action framework more aggressive goals, and we need to be doubling down in all of those fronts. And how do we reflect that in the One Minnesota plan? And part of the purpose of putting something in a high level strategic plan is that you have to report out, you have to measure, you have to tell people that you're committing to that, and then you have to do the work. We also recognize that there's a lot of vulnerability and need to invest in resiliency and adaptation. And some of these metrics are things that we've talked about based on surveys and data that we have. We know that there are, 150,000 plus properties that are on a regular risk for flooding. This impacts, tens of thousands of miles of roads and commercial buildings, and all of this is driven in such a way that we know that disproportionate impacts and those that are most likely to have the least voice historically in the conversation are impacted first. So how do we reflect the needs for resilience and adaptation in the One Minnesota plan? So understanding that as a background and taking all of the work that you all did with us as part of the climate action framework, we were asked by the governor's office to work across the state agencies to put together a climate-driven interagency budget proposal for the upcoming session. So we did this for over the course of 4 meetings. This has been the last couple months of work. We're not done yet. Peter's probably working on it in the back right now. So we're getting there. But thankfully, a lot of the work we had done together in terms of defining the problem and previously thinking about how we could use the supplemental budget last session, and now knowing more about not only the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but the Inflation Reduction Act. How do we maximize this moment in time, thinking with all of the climate action framework in our pocket? So I've grayed out all the numbers because we're not supposed to specifically talk about what the proposed numbers are, but we are supposed to be engaging with you all who we need to be doing this work with. And I think the exciting takeaway here is that of the 15 agencies that are represented on the subcabinet, there are 11 agencies represented in the budget proposals. And for those of you that followed the supplemental budget process last year, the total is in line with what we proposed. Not a secret. Last year we were proposing about $1 billion. What the ask is collectively is in that vein, and tomorrow we'll know what the forecast is, and that will inform ideally what the various targets are. But recognizing that the need certainly hasn't gotten less since the last session, and these are the agencies that are included in the initial ask. So Department of Ag, Department of Health, Department of Labor and Industry, Board of Water and Soil Resources, Department of Employment and Economic Development, the Pollution Control Agency, the DNR, Commerce, Admin, who controls all the buildings in the fleet for the state agencies, MnDOT, and Met Council. So broad swath of all of us that need to be invested in this. And then a few highlights. This is not the extent of everything, but just to get the idea of where we are. You've got the measures of progress that should look familiar to you all because these come straight out of the climate action framework, and then some of the examples of things that we have included in the budget, thinking about maximizing the federal funding. And this is a theme across the proposals, that the clear direction we have gotten from the governor's office and from Minnesota management budget, so essentially the banker and the money folks for the state, is we cannot leave any federal dollars on the table, and we want to make sure that each agency that needs to put up capacity or support others to put up capacity or come up with matching funds is putting that prominently in the front. So here are the ideas that, some of the ideas that we're asking for consideration around clean transportation. Next. Delay here.
I assume that in the budget requests, it's everything from bonding to general fund, department dollars. So it's across kind of a variety of things. And then the second thing I'm wondering is, I assume there's also perhaps, given the forecast coming out, some one-time perhaps spending as well as ongoing spending.
Super good question, Ann. So we are hopeful that climate work can be funded by all sorts of sources of money, and certainly the general fund and the surplus in the general fund is a large component of this. And to the extent that this is a anomaly in the way that the state deals with money, and that we don't anticipate to have $13 billion of surplus in 2 years, thinking about one-time spending to catalyze activities through grants and external partnerships is a huge component of it. But we also recognize there are other dedicated pots of money that touch climate, and we should be maximizing those too. So it's a combination of all of those things. Here is a sample of the things that we are asking for investment on in the natural and working lands area. I mean, you can see that a lot of these are building resiliency, but we know that investments in soil health and enhancement in habitat bring all sorts of other benefits, not just water quality, but also quality of life and economic opportunities and pride in place. So, and others who have been following this know that there's a lot of potential in the natural and working lands sector to invest and see reductions that we haven't yet realized in that sector, whereas we've seen significant progress in some of the other sectors because we just really haven't given the working lands and the natural areas the investment and the attention that they deserve. So maximizing that as a theme in the budget. Resilient communities, making sure that we are providing grants for planning, increasing the technical assistance and workforce opportunities of the Green Step Cities program. Also looking at waste and the way that we are thinking about how we generate, reuse, recycle, and produce less in the form of trash that will end up as greenhouse gases. Clean energy and buildings, thinking about weatherization, energy codes. You'll see the competitiveness fund from Commerce, again, is really just making sure that we can maximize all those Inflation Reduction Act dollars that Minnesota would be eligible for. There's a number of proposals around health and community, making sure that the Department of Health has adequate staff to actually support the work of climate and health and the nexus there. One that came directly out of consultation that we've been having with Minnesota's 11 sovereign nations is making sure that whenever necessary or needed, we have the technical assistance for tribes to be able to apply for grants and to be competitive, and that they can then maximize the opportunities that are presented by the influx in federal dollars. And then recognizing that that economic opportunities underlie all of this, making sure that we're building a workforce that is situated to accelerate investments in the energy transition and outfit our communities and our buildings with the transition infrastructure that is necessary. So a little bit of everything there. Those are the examples. So this is not the extent of it. And I show that only because I wanted people to see the breadth of it. And again, we're finishing it like today. So we're working furiously, but there will be more iteration following the forecast. And ultimately the governors, and Joe's on from the governor's office, so he can chime in if I misstate something. But the governor and MMB will have time through December and early January to finalize what the governor is going to propose to the legislature. And then, as I said, we know there's a lot of energy around climate proposals in both the House and the Senate. So we expect that there will be a lot of really excellent ideas to work with in the next session.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was great. I have a question, not regarding the state government, because what you've been working. So part of the CAF mentioned that you want to also have the businesses and the local community trying to help in the implementation. Have you think about ways that they can access funding? Because I know the IRA and the funding for cities. And do you have a role in that, or implementation?
Yeah, so I think both of our agencies and the other agencies across the enterprise, there are a few ways that we have been kind of working with different kind of groups that might be eligible for funding. So MMB has been looking across all of the state agencies, and they've hosted a few targeted kind of webinars where agencies can go through and say, okay, this is kind of like for businesses. You could apply for energy efficiency grants, or you could apply for, water quality. There are a bunch of different things you could look at. We have been participating and having conversations with local communities as well. It kind of depends on what level, depending on the opportunity. So I think we have been doing our best in trying to identify opportunities, and then if we're not the agency or the we aren't eligible to be able to either send on or partner. One thing that we've heard, and this is baked into our proposal to draw down federal funds, is that there is just not enough grant writing capacity, particularly on the energy side, and I think this is for you guys as well. So much of the federal funding is competitive, so it's not just like, if you do this, you get it. You have to write a grant, and it's a federal grant, so it requires certain expertise, and it's all of these things. So we've thought a lot about how we can leverage our expertise as an entity that deals with federal funds all the time, but we don't necessarily need to be the people who are writing grants. So we have some, I think I'm proud of the way our team has gotten really creative to think about ways to support the need for grants and sort of right size our involvement, and then allow for some support that's not within the government that can help, regional agency. There could be a lot of ways you could have regional development agencies that, or local community. So I think the answer is yes. The way that it shows up for a particular entity that's eligible would probably look different depending on what they're interested in doing.
Yeah, and I'll just give a really specific example. At our senior management team that meets every Monday morning now, we are regularly going through all of the IRA, IIJA opportunities that touch the work of the MPCA tangentially or directly, and saying, is this something that we should be applying for, or is this something that Hilda's organization should be applying for? And if not, have we told Hilda or asked her if she's applying? Have we asked Hilda if she needs help with the application? And can we bring Hilda and Micah together to make sure that if we could do it together, we would get an even bigger opportunity there? And that's part of the work that we're trying to do with the proposal around technical assistance for tribes and grants, because that's specifically what we've heard from them, but others are experiencing that too. This morning, there was one around solid waste and developing recycling markets. And we said, we've told the solid waste leaders around the state, hey, we think you should apply for this, and we will help convene you. And if you don't, we're going to apply for it. But we think you could get a better result. And so let's all talk about how you guys can be successful in it. And if not, we're doing it. So I think there's a number of ways that this can happen, and just trying to make sure we're not missing anything.
Just a question back to goals, and there are so many different numbers that have been tossed out. Earlier there was net zero by 2050, and there was discussion of carbon free by 2040, and then the IRA 40% carbon reductions by 2030. I think, if I've got all those straight. Now, I think back to June in the conversations in this room about matching up with the IPCC standards. So I'm not sure what matches up with what at this point with all the various, percentages and numbers that have been out there. I do think, though, one part of the equation that we brought up in June that still needs to remain on the table with all of those numbers is the reliability component and the affordability. We talked about all three, right? Sustainability, but reliability and affordability along with that. And we just, I know we're talking about all kinds of different percentages and all kinds of different numbers. But we've got to be very mindful and very thoughtful of all three legs of that stool going forward.
Yeah, and just to on the goals, the 40% or the 2040 is electric, isn't the electric generation sector, the 2050 side. So it's like different equation, each of those numbers. So, but yeah, I think that that's one of the things that we've been giving quite a bit of thought to. I'll plug in for our sunsets at the end of this year, which would be an important part of that component. And so I'm hoping we can get the legislature to pass that. But I think, I think about reliability in the resilience. Like as we think about resilient communities, there are also, communities that have reliable electricity and reliable power. And so there's quite a bit of money in the federal space for resilient. There's one of the larger opportunities that we're pursuing now or thinking about kind of who might be best to pursue are some of the resilience and reliability components that are in the IIJA, because those are particularly for communities and co-ops and would be really helpful for a variety of reasons. So definitely top of mind.
These are the targets that show up now in the framework, and these are the targets from the IPCC. But to your point, Mike, that you can dig into this and what is a net zero emission and how you account for different sources of energy. There's lots of ways that you can slice and dice this. And so I think, and we need to be thinking about affordability and reliability and what that means for somebody who's an Xcel Energy customer versus who's part of a municipal co-op in Greater Minnesota is different.
Let's have a follow-up to Mike's question. On the 2040, the 100% carbon reduction, it's not feasible now, but we're just hoping that things change that will allow us to obtain that.
It's 100% element.
I mean, already this past year, we've been put on notice by MISO. They have potential rolling blackouts for this past summer. Reliability is huge to us and to our members. And I guess I just cannot be in agreement with that statement that's on the thing. And I don't know, Chris, if you feel the same way, but that's overreaching of what's even feasible at this time.
Thanks for that comment. So I think, it's part of the framework. One of the things we've been thinking a lot about are new tech available. And so as we, kind of work through the legislative, it's not in current law, right? That'll go through the process and how that shakes out. One, I just want to note that Lucinda made a comment to not forget the academic community in grant writing. So thank you, Lucinda. That's a great comment. I know that that's something that we've been looking to leverage anyone who knows how to write a grant.
So a couple of things. I think that's a really good comment, but I want to share that kind of a broader comment. So there are goals in here around natural and working lands, for example, that based on today's funding or today's infrastructure, whether it be around the number of trees we're producing each year for reforestation, that don't exist today, but the technology is there, the capacity is there. It's a matter of applying the extraordinary amount of resources towards the problem. So I would argue that really throughout this plan, we could look and say that those goals aren't achievable as we are thinking today and as we are sitting today, but they are achievable. They're achievable with new technologies, with stretching ourselves financially and using dollars effectively. So I think that's a really important statement, and I think we got to dig into that, because if we pick one thing and say it's not possible to hit that number, well, why isn't it possible? Then we got to dig a little further and say, what are those things that are going to unlock that reliability and ability to move forward? So, because I think we would look at many things in here and say that, but all of it is possible. It must be possible. We don't actually have a choice but for it to be possible to tackle climate and to survive as human beings on this earth.
If I could then, just back to the original question, because I guess maybe we're looking for clarity, because I see the slide again talks about net zero emissions by 2050. If that's indeed in sync with the IPCC guidelines. Now the 2040 number that came up, net wasn't net zero, but carbon free by 2040. Help me just clarify or help me understand exactly the difference. And
That's
did we
the
differ from the
electricity.
IPCC guidelines?
That's the electricity. So yeah, so that's just the electricity sector, which is also in line with the Biden administration's timeline. I don't think they have a specific timeline for electricity like they have other kinds of. So what I think I'd like to zoom us out a little bit so that we don't get into a big discussion about 100% of by 2040, because I think that's doing a disservice to the rest of the framework. I do want to hold the point that as we think about the next iteration of what this group can do, I think for all of you, there are things that really resonate in the framework. There may be things that you or the organization that employs you can't get on board with, or maybe wouldn't want to emphasize. And I think we need to find a way to, I want to have that conversation and how we kind of navigate that, because I think that one of the things, and I don't remember whether it was the traffic death or the hospital zero death kind of framework, but I thought that really resonated with me, and that there are a lot of ways to kind of get there. There are also, different roles that every person has to play as we get there, and it may be that, there are things that, you or your organization are really committed to, and others that you just, sort of need to leave aside. And I think that's fine. That's like the purpose of it, that there's a diverse set of opinions and there's a diverse set of perspectives, which kind of have moved us along really well. And as we think about the next iteration, I want to hold space for having sort of varying levels of enthusiasm about particular parts of it, but also a commitment and an ability to engage on the implementation going.
And the one thing I'll just clarify is these are goals that we have. They are not in statute. We expect that there will be discussion at the legislature this year about goals that legislators, that elected folks think should be in statute. We are focused on moving ahead with implementation that drives us towards this. So that's where we are. We're not proposing anything in law at this point around targets. We are just focused on moving forward, because I would echo Ann's point. We really have no other choice.
All right. Other questions from council members? I think we have Lucinda and Wayne online as well. So Lucinda and Wayne, if you'd like to speak up, feel free to use the raise hand feature. Great space for that. Anything else? If not, then maybe we'll transition to the next piece. So, we work with multiple states on their climate councils, and this is a pivotal point where, the council is putting all of its effort into advising around the development of the framework. That's been published. And now, as the commissioners were just saying, the question is around implementation, how to actually get it. So there's a question around implementation, which is the role of this council. What role do you all want to play at this phase? What should the council look like? What do you want to be involved in? So the second half of this meeting is going to be focused on that question. And we'd love to get your input about what role. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Arnold, who's been speaking with, I think, all of you one-on-one.
Didn't get to everyone. But
Almost all
I
of
tried.
you. And just to provide a summary of kind of some of the themes that she heard.
Thanks, Trevor. All right. So I thank you all for the ones that I was able to, if I didn't connect with you, it was not a reflection of you. It was a reflection of me and my capability to manage my own time. But so thank you all for those who did have a conversation with me over the last little bit. So I want to just take us back a little bit. So this group was convened following the governor's executive order, which established both the climate change subcabinet, which Commissioner Kessler and I sit on, Commissioner Kessler chairs, and convened this group. That executive order essentially charged the PCA, along with the other commissioners and our teams, a lot of our team's time, to the outcome of that was the climate action framework. So Commissioner Kessler's team is looking at what needs to be revamped and kind of thought about in the entirety of the executive order. This discussion is sort of focused on how or what we think about this group as sort of a subset of that larger kind of enterprise perspective and kind of set of activities. So your terms end in the spring. Thank you for those of you who found your letters and helped us to remind. We have a couple folks. Alex Class took a different job, so she's unable to join. So we have a couple folks who have barely or about their future. So just to, we will have some turnover. One of the things that we've been thinking about is kind of overall structure, and then I'll get to what everyone told me. But so I think we're likely to keep kind of the term and the makeup. We may switch to something where we stagger terms so we don't have everyone waving on or off at the same time, because that's just like a logistical challenge to orient a whole new group. So we're thinking about exactly what that looks like. We will have some structure that was similar, an application and a kind of appointment process. That's something that this administration is very committed to in all, like any board or all positions that come up in the state, of which there are like 900. There are a lot. So they're processing a lot. In the springtime, we'll go through that process. And then we're looking at an enterprise as to how we will, the governor might issue an updated executive order, and if he decides to, then. So that's kind of the context that we're having this conversation and a little bit about what we're thinking of. So I chatted with a number of you and asked you questions. What should it look like? What would you like to focus on? Got some sort of structural feedback on different models to look at, whether that's a DOT, the sustainable transportation work. There are a lot of kind of groups that advise the agencies, and so a few of you pointed to other kinds of groups as models that work well. So thank you for pointing in those directions. There are a lot of those, and so it's helpful to know what you feel like works well and what doesn't, and the advantages and disadvantages of some of those structures. So then when we got into kind of what this group might do, there are kind of two buckets that I had heard, and so sort of specifically asked for reflection on those and got largely answers along those lines. And so I want to kind of talk about those, and Trevor and I are going to tag team on facilitation here to talk about what kind of things this group might do. So the first bucket I sort of think about as outreach and education and championing the framework. So the ideas along that kind of track were pretty wide ranging. They were pretty interesting. So some folks, I think, were thinking more like education, doing either talks, using the slides that Commissioner Kessler referenced, sort of engaging with community. Other ideas were to do sort of like get commitments, use your networks to get commitments against particular parts of the framework. So, Anne's going to sign herself up for planting 2 million trees, which, something like that. But along those lines, where, which is not a goal. It's a really easy example to say, we're going to plant 2 million trees, and Anne's committed to 1 million of them, and then Chris is going to get the other 1 million, and then that's the kind of structure that a couple of folks suggested. A couple of folks talked about, just being clear about if we go in that direction, what the commitment is. Are you signing up for 2 engagements a quarter or an engagement a quarter? What's the, okay, you say you're going to do this, but what does that mean? And I think that's kind of those were the types of thoughts that folks had in that bucket. There was a lot of enthusiasm for that bucket. And so that's sort of one set of things that we could look at. I want to come back to kind of overall discussion, but I'll move to the second bucket, which was more along the lines of implementation. This, I kind of started out with a little bit of a preconceived notion of what this would look like, and my conversations shifted that a little bit, so I'll be really candid about that. But one thing I heard almost unanimously from the folks that I talked to was how valuable the time earlier this year where we kind of we sort of smashed the action teams and the state and this group together and formed work groups to work through a lot of the, the particular areas that we had defined as our buckets of action that we would put in the framework. And that was, I think my sense was that both personally, that was something that was really valuable to those folks who participated on that, but also seemed to be the place where the most work got done. So I think that is a model we could look at in kind of implementing the framework. I mean, you saw our budget proposals. There's a lot of other work that could be done that's not state driven, to Hilda's point. That is, not dependent on a legislative proposal, that are sort of work that could happen outside of those buckets or outside of the kind of, legislative grant making, some of our day-to-day, where kind of together we would multiply forces in many ways. And then the other idea was to kind of think through where there are sort of cross sector or like crosses across some of the climate action framework areas, and start to break down barriers, use this team to kind of do the same thing of smash together with state teams, but to not align it with the framework and align it to like cross sector or cross section. And if we think of the framework as our kind of guiding tool, areas where there just needs to be a lot of kind of work to figure out, okay, how does this work together? And how do we advance goals that may sort of touch in a number of those areas? So that was a lot. And so thank you all for giving me all those ideas and for the conversations. I think they were really great. So I want this to be kind of the seed to then talk about, what resonates, what doesn't resonate, what would be a good use of this group's time, what would be a good use of, maybe you're someone who said this isn't going to be me next time, but I think that this group should do this, hopefully this can kind of be the discussion so that we can think about and design then what will sort of wrap back into the executive order process.
Great, thanks, Commissioner. Okay, so council members, the question is, and I don't think these are mutually exclusive, but like option A is the sort of council members, you all championing the climate action framework or parts of it, going out and giving speeches or engaging your community or getting. Option B is, I'll say, fostering collaboration. So we could have implementation work groups or looking at cross-sector issues. Maybe there's an option C that we haven't thought of that you have in mind. So for folks in the room, I'm not going to make you go one by one unless nobody says anything, and then I will. If you want to just flip up your name tent, if you have something to say, then I can help get mics around to folks. Online for Lucinda and Wayne, if you want to use the raise hand, be looking out for that. And Eric, please go ahead.
I guess I'd be curious to know, you think about like the Venn diagram overlap of where there's enthusiasm from the council, and then what would be most valuable to you and the governor and the administration. Like, what is this group uniquely capable of doing that maybe is a weak spot for all of you, or that would be most useful, I guess. I'll pitch in.
Sure. So I'll take a shot at answering. I think one, that the value from that this group has is I think the folks that you're in communication with and the networks that you bring. One of the things that I've really appreciated about this group is that, and this is not a knock to anyone, but it's somewhat of a different set of folks that normally come together at a table, and I think that kind of uniqueness of perspective and sort of group. You may sit at tables with some other people, but this set of people together is rather unique, at least in the sort of, in particular, the energy areas that I tend to spend most time in. And so I think both of those things I articulated. One is you have access to people that, or to organizations. I think, Micah, if you don't mind me sharing, Micah and I talked about, Micah can go talk to a bunch of pediatricians that I might not ever get invited to talk to, right? But who care and who are very interested. And I think one of the things that we had a conversation about is also they may be at a different place in thinking about how they fit into the climate action framework than, like this side of the table, the side of the room, which is not that who are much more thinking about, what technologies do we need to get to carbon free, that's a different kind of conversation. A set of folks who own a physician practice. And I think all of those need to be together to make us be able. So I think access and expertise are most helpful, and where exactly are the kind of biggest challenges, particularly on the expertise side, I imagine will change over time. And so that one we may need to think a little bit more about, but those are the kind of the two.
Yeah. One thing I'll add is that you all come with a level of credibility that to audiences that Grace and I may not have, and are connected to build on what she has with others who have different expertise. I think as we move through the legislative process, if there are specific proposals that you see coming out of the climate action framework that are relevant to you, and you see, like, if I lended my voice, if I showed up at a committee hearing and said, as part of this group that was diverse and committed, please see the value in this. I think there's one thing that would be very helpful in the short term. And then I think whatever comes of this, combined with the Inflation Reduction Act, as far as going out and talking to people and helping them see themselves in the implementation, that I think will also be very.
And commissioners, is it fair to say that those qualities are things that would work, whether it's the champion model or more of the fostering collaboration? We saw some of that in the work group previously, where you co-chaired and helped bring.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to have to do implementation work and we're going to have to do engagement work. So if somebody wants to do a little both.
So this is Chris Clark. I'll just speak up and say we're actually already engaged in talking to our communities, mostly as a result of people asking questions. So I'm really excited to know that there's a 5, 10, and 15-minute set of slides that we can actually maybe start working into the presentations we're doing. It tends to come to us focused on energy, but it actually gives us an opportunity to broaden the horizon of what we're talking about, and maybe sharing what the task force has done, why we think this is the right path for Minnesota to be leading on, and then also to help be a bit of a champion around. So I think I see a natural place there. It actually builds on some of the work we do around conservation and energy. So again, it's places where we're already out trying to help people understand that there may be rebates that our customers could get. We do partners in energy with select communities, which is often because the community is identified as a sustainability effort that they want to chase as a community. So it's maybe a really good connection point between the local and state effort here. And then on maybe the more show and tell side, we're going to build the state's largest solar project. We actually talked about having an ability to use that as a place to show not just what we're doing with the transition from coal to renewables, but also with workforce. Look at Kevin, because Kevin's a key partner in this. We work with DEED to actually bring people from the cities, train them, and put them to work on the site. So I think it may be a place where we can showcase Minnesota's leadership. And we're working to find places where we can maybe showcase some of the innovation too. And I think that helps get to the excitement side of it, and also lets people know we're taking advantage of the federal money, which everybody likes to make sure for sure. So just a few ideas on that.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that sounds like the champion model of this. And going to Hilda, and then Kevin, you were named. You haven't said anything yet, which I'm nervous about. So I feel like we have to go to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to build on what Chris says. He already said. I think the part of the championship, going out and presenting the CAP will be. We can try to link it, and that maybe be more work for you, maybe to the IRA fund. I think people here are very aware of what that funding is, but I don't know if like all communities or tribal or the cities know about it. So we can maybe link it and say, well, we have this CAP and we'll help you in this, but there's also this money that try to connect those two. And the second part about that, cluster implementation. Very well about it. For the agencies, always now we have the advisory council. You need to do something with that. I think I'm personally I am on it, but I think we need to. We are really.
Thanks, Hilda. And I think that is one thing that we're thinking about within our teams is how we'll structure the work going forward, because our work will change a little bit. And so the kind of mutual model that I think we had, that might look a little different as we think through our. And I appreciate anyone who's mindful of our team's time.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So
For the record, this is the first time Kevin's been volunteering.
Yeah, I'll take it. I didn't get my caffeine this morning, so I'm finally catching up. So I think, I agree with Hilda's point. Yeah, we don't need make work, to keep the commission feeling relevant. But I think on the implementation side, I found the process useful in working with the sort of the sub cabinet working groups. I also think there's a lot of, the framework's a lot of things, and other than sort of like an elevator speech of it, I don't know how much we really need people to absorb in most contexts, right? Like they don't need, I think most people will attach to certain parts of it, and those will be of interest. And that's the better part of it, is that it has applications for lots of different uses. And so what interests me is looking at opportunities that are connecting climate progress, economic development, and workforce opportunities. And I think that it might make sense to drill down on some of those. And I think that's where some of the folks on the advisory council and others could, so we look at industrial, and we look at, for example, green fertilizer, or, sort of industrial decarbonization focused on the ag sector, or looking at mining, the mining sector, where you could have utilities and mining companies and local elected officials and labor working together on moving some solutions. And there's a lot of federal money out there that's either available already or that we can chase, and there's a lot of state money, at least right now. And so finding some of those opportunities, I think, would be good, and trying to create some clusters around what does this look like in Northeast Minnesota? What does it look like in Southwest Minnesota? Building a little bit of regional clustering and coming up with some goals that could proceed from the framework and then turn into, projects. But projects where you put enough, not like 1,000 projects, but a handful that you put enough effort into. You could create some kind of breakthrough opportunity where folks actually saw real value in it outside of this group.
Kevin, I might just see if I can reflect back what I think I heard. But I think you were leaning more on the fostering collaboration model. And you mentioned regional groups, which is different. Previously, we had sector focused. You're talking about more geographically organized.
I think those opportunities are specific to sectors and regions, some of which are because certain regions have sectors that matter and those that matter less, and so for their economies or whatever. And so I think it would be both, right? And it might start with a sectoral approach saying, okay, where do we have opportunities in working lands or whatever that is, and then naturally come down to places. But I think these things need both to have places and specific industries that they're targeting. If we want to get to actual economic development and work, they have to be pretty targeted to particular industries and employers.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Ann, and then I saw that Wayne, you have your hand up online, so we'll go to you next, and then Pat, was that a raise hand?
Hi. Well, I think it's a both and around implementation and championing for sure. And I certainly got a lot out of the implementation part of this work, and I really hope that it continues because I think it really opened up a lot of dialogue. On the championing side, the reason I think it is so incredibly important right now is because of all the new legislators. You know, a third of the legislature needs education on topics. Some of them may come with an inherent interest or knowledge. Some may not, and we need to kind of move that along. Second, there's a lot of competing issues out there. And there's a lot of voice for competing interests of a lot happening in Minnesota. And all of those are really important and really valid. But I think we're all here because we think this issue is worthy of significant attention. I also think the other reason the communication and the championing is interesting and our message is important is that we're in a different place today than we were even a year ago. And that is that there are federal dollars available. It allows us to do things at a speed, a pace, and scale that we haven't before. So it's doing things different that we're going to be asking the legislature to do, that we're going to be asking every organization to do that's at this table and in this room. And that's really hard for folks to think past how we have done things and the pace and scale in which we have been moving to where we need to move and what these federal dollars are telling us we can do. And I think that's really, really important that we have a message that articulates that this is new, this is different, this isn't same old. This is at a whole new pace and scale to meet the challenge of this moment. So I do think this championing is important to get to all of these new folks, to really shift the message to the time is today, not tomorrow, not 3 weeks from now, because the dollars are here now. I also, when I think about all of these federal resources, which are so significant, you are absolutely right in that a huge chunk are going to move through states. A huge chunk of those dollars are going to move through states. But a huge chunk of these dollars aren't going to move through states. We need to have an impact on those as well and strategies around those as well. And I've certainly heard that from you all today, which is like music all over the place. It's orchestra to my ears. But we need to think not only about those dollars, which I hope you all are waking up every day thinking about every single one of those and getting every dollar that we can, but how are we also capitalizing on every single dollar that isn't going to go through the state, that's going to go straight through federal programs or other options. So I think the communication is vitally important, like immediately, to really bring folks along.
Thanks, Ann. And just can I ask, do you think the structure that we have of the, I mean, you guys should see the 5-10 minute, but do you think that's a good foundation for sort of letting you guys kind of do that and, you know, and sort of build on?
I do. I think it's a great way to start. And I think we'll learn every time we get together, we'll learn. But again, this is urgent. This is a now urgent. We got 8 years left and the clock is ticking. And I think that all of us showing up and you know, really leaning in on this is huge.
Thanks, Ann. I'm going to go to Wayne, and then I'll go to Pat. Wayne, I'm hoping that we'll be able to hear you if you want to speak.
I think you can hear me now, right?
We can, yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, and you know, I believe too, both championing how this framework can be carried out and implementation are important. I think as far as championing goes in the circles that I am in, we have our own tribal newspaper. We also are connected with our local news, and a lot of times they report on the things that we do, the efforts that we're making. I think as far as implementation goes, at 2:30 today, I have a meeting with a group of people here on our updating our strategic energy plan, and we make sure that people in the region know about this, and maybe have opportunity to see things that we do. And those are, I think, as some of you have seen, we've put in solar PV and also taking conservation measures on all of our buildings and making sure that they're meeting certain codes. And we certainly want to raise awareness within our community and all of the neighbors that we have. So those are the efforts that we're making to champion and implement parts of this framework, and appreciate all the help and promotion that everybody's doing in regard to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. To Pat.
A couple of you have commented on our work with the groups this spring. And I've had some people from those groups come to me and say, how can we help? So I think we would be very wise to do whatever we can to reach out to those groups. I'm thinking agriculture here, of course, because we've got a lot of work to do on the ag side. But if you've got major ag groups, and corn growers was one, Minnesota corn growers, that have a vast network of members across the state of Minnesota, and they research and advocacy, and they're at the legislature. And I'm using them as an example. If they're willing to come forward and say, how can we help? Then we need to have discussions and be involved. So my analogy is we need some lead blockers here for a running game. And what you two have brought forward today, I am impressed. A lot of the things that I have thought about leading up to this meeting, you commented on as to how you're trying to pull things together. And you don't have a whole lot of time to pull this together as you're looking towards the legislative session and a budget. But I'm impressed with what you've laid out in front of us. Of course, the devil is in the details. But once we do get a plan together, we need to reach out. I think this group, each of us has various talents and gifts that we've been given. And, I'm willing to do what I can do in my sphere. And, but I think we all need to work together and just pull it together. Each one of us, we're the conduit in between a USED catalyst. We need something to just kind of make this work. The federal dollars and all of that, that's the big kitty. And if the state can be the catalyst and all of the people involved here, it will be to our benefit.
So Pat, thanks for raising that. I'll say that we have reached out to pork and corn and milk and regularly meet with representatives from those groups and are trying to do that more, and actually are looking to schedule a meeting with the people that they trust as their data scientists. And we're trying to reach in and say, please come and please bring the person that you would look to if you had a question about how to calculate emissions and how to identify opportunities. The budget proposals that we're putting together are really to maximize support for transition and mitigation within working lands. And so may ask you to brainstorm with me about how, if you could be there or if you could help us with messages, because we really want people to see not just, hey, we're coming to you with these numbers, but how do you see yourself in this general challenge, and how do we work with you to raise up your ideas towards the solution?
Well, you need to have the scientists and the knowledge, but then you need to have the people that can take that message and get it out to the greater good of Minnesota. And that's how I would see my role. And there are some others that are like me that could do a similar role. And I think that's what we really need so that we have a way to convey the knowledge and the wisdom that we're getting as we work on climate change out to the farm. I look at many of my farmer neighbors and they just don't change. They do the same thing that they've done for years and years and years. If they change one thing per year, they're pretty excited about that. However, we've got some goals that we have to reach by 2030, 2040, 2050, and we're not going to get there unless we have some change made in a much at a faster pace. But the message will have to get out through trusted people.
Thanks, Pat. Other folks who haven't spoken yet, thoughts on championing or fostering collaboration or other things around implementation that you think this council should? Otherwise, I'm going to ask, because there is a lot of energy around this championing model, I want to follow up on that and ask, what do you need? You're in a position to do that. So we've talked about, I think, a 5, 10, 15-minute presentation with talking points. So that's a resource that I think the state could provide. What else do you need as council members? Coordination? Is it? No. Just helpful. Got a hand up, Anne? That was like a, if we were at an auction, I think I would have.
So I think I love the little snippets, and I think some of us are more comfortable with some aspects of the plan, some chapters than others. And as long as it's okay that we focus on those aspects, if we go deeper, and then maybe it is some one-on-one conversation about where are the best places for you to go, and like setting some targets with each of us. And I think our employees, objectives for the year. What are the 5 places that are really important for you to go to, Chris, or for you to go to, Mike, and really talk with, and what can we do to support you? Do you have the connections that you need? I think really helping us individually create to do that would be really cool.
Other folks, resources you would need? Yeah, Chris.
So maybe just adding on to what you said, Ann, I think one of the things that it's always good to have a website or a landing page or somewhere to point people for follow-up, but I also think maybe some brainstorming with this group or thinking about when we do, to your point, that get the I want to help, what do we do with that? And we can probably come up with some ideas on our own. I'd like to make sure actually ideas the sub cabinet thinks are helpful rather than who did you send to me this week? So I think maybe that's a place where taking people up on their desire to get in. We may, once we champion and get a little bit of energy there, what's the most effective way?
Thanks, Chris. Other thoughts from folks? I have another question, which is, so we've talked quite a bit about the championing model. There's also the question of, should there be implementation work groups or something like that? So we had work groups to help inform the development of the climate action framework. Should work groups be formed again, but around implementation, and maybe it's not, maybe it's not the full set of actions under each section of the framework. Maybe it's one specific thing, barrier that needs to be addressed now in order to unlock potential. Do you all have thoughts on that, and knowing that some of you chaired or co-chaired those groups and put in a lot of time into that. Yeah.
Jump in again on that because I thought that was a useful process, but it's a useful process if it's useful for the state. So I just want to start with that. It's a useful process if it's useful for the state. Sometimes the reason I think it could be useful, but I might be wrong on this, is that when you have folks that are not at the state helping and participating, we can push in ways that are harder to push internally. And so if that is useful, I would really welcome the opportunity to continue to participate in those kinds of working groups because we can push, we can bring perspective that perhaps is a little harder to do internally. And I do think will be really helpful in the long run if the state.
You just wanted to say that you agree, Hilda. Micah, we haven't heard from you. Do you have thoughts around the role of the council?
No, much of what's been said, I completely agree with, and you've articulated a lot of those points really well. I do think we have an accountability as the council members that we've developed this. We've provided a lot of input that now this is the ownership part and getting out and promoting because we feel so strongly about what's in part what we're trying to accomplish. So I think this is the real hard work, but I think it's also obviously it's the work. I wanted to add in.
Eric, I wasn't sure if you wanted. Mike and Dave, I know you had concerns about the electric sector goal, but aside from that, there are components under that maybe are of interest, like updating the grid modernization. You wouldn't be asked probably to champion something you have concerns about, but you have thoughts around implementation for some of those other components?
Well, I've had the chance to visit with Grace and appreciate the opportunity over the phone. And I'm one of those folks who's really kind of going forward as more of maybe a resource on a working group or something like that. Won't be able to really participate in the council itself, but I do think when it comes to to the point about going forward, really all technologies need to be on the table, and I think that's really got to be the discussion when it comes to the electricity sector. Because again, when you come back to all three legs of the stool, as I've talked about more times than I care to admit, the reliability and affordability component, it's. I think that we've got to be careful about putting too many eggs into singular baskets. That's all I would just leave for the group. The goals and the numbers are what they are. I think that if there's the openness and willingness to consider all options on all fronts, well, then that's an important part of the conversation.
No, I think I expressed them earlier. I'm just concerned about how that got changed. And it wasn't a group, it wasn't a council decision. So I thought it just struck me off. I didn't see it on the agenda. I didn't see handouts ahead of time. So maybe it's my oversight, but I truly still believe from a technical standpoint, if you had engineers in the room, you'd have a lot different answer than what people just want. What you want and what you can do are two different things.
Maybe just following up on that, would it be valuable? I mean, there probably are several components of the plan where folks look at it and think that doesn't feel realistic. Would it be valuable to convene folks maybe around some of those and figure out what is possible? Okay, careful about the messaging. All right. Right. Commissioners, I'm wondering if you have follow-up questions like council members.
So I have one as we think about a renewal of an executive order. Our team is thinking about how we can embed the climate action framework across the enterprise through the One Minnesota goals that we talked about initially, and frankly, putting staff across the enterprise to make sure that we can support the work that needs to happen and support our partners in doing that work. Those are just some of the things we've talked about in terms of what needs to be in a new executive order. If people have thoughts about other things other than your role that you would like to suggest for consideration in executive order, I mean, you're all knowledgeable in your own right and expert that sort of have thoughts. I haven't written anything down yet, so there's no wrong answers.
Well, you know, one thing I think the administration has done well, and the sub-cabinet probably is the vehicle that has done that, is share information across agencies. And I think as we move forward and chase some of the federal dollars, but then also work on implementation of these goals, I think continuing that dialogue among is healthy. I'll leave it to you all to decide whether that's language in the executive order or just what you're already wanted to. I think we are seeing movement of action across sectors. And I know, for instance, when I had the opportunity to speak to a much more transportation focused than focused, they had a lot of questions and great opportunity to hear what's happening in one sector and then talk about lessons from our sector that may be helpful to them. I think that's, I think we're going to see more of that over the next.
Thank you. I think I can remember, but I don't remember if the previous order, it says that it creates a cabinet and that the advisory separate entities. And maybe it should keep this way, but maybe it's clear that they will be like eventually working together, because I guess that gives the one thing I raised, that there are several states that have something similar like this, but they are together, like the agencies, members, and you don't need to change it, but maybe that, yeah, like we are part of the advisory council.
Hilda, you're saying right into the executive order, more integration between the council and the state agencies, or the climate subcabinet. I was going to say, in case you probably all have the order memorized, but in case you don't, there are two major duties of the subcabinet. They have subduties, but the first is policy and strategy development for climate mitigation and resilience, and then the second is public engagement. And then for the council itself, there were three sort of subcomponents. One was identifying opportunities to the policies and strategies. Second was promoting equity, and third was fodder. Revised.
Yeah, I will say thanks for raising that, because that is one of the things that I forgot to mention that is within the short list of things that we want to include. Recognizing that we have identified some strategies and policies and proposals, but that there's a long way to go on equity, and that needs to be a continued focus. And as we think about the money coming to the state and through the state, how are we making sure that equity is at the forefront of all of those implementations? That's a really good reminder. Thanks.
And I guess a question to the council. So what thoughts do you have about lifting up underrepresented voices? Are the things you'd like to do, or the state do, or questions that you have that you feel like thoughts on equitable or related to a just transition?
Or if you have suggestions of voices that aren't on the council that we should invite or consider.
And you can send those separately too. Yeah. There's always, you don't have to.
Other questions from the commissioners?
No, none from me.
Okay. Council members, anything else you wanted to say or questions that you have. Yeah, Micah.
So this is more, sorry, this is getting in the weeds, kind of structural. If we do start doing outreach, is that something that we need to let you know what we're doing ahead of time? It has to be fairly structured or centered. Okay.
I would say it's helpful to know how something that's state produced,
Right.
you know,
Okay.
like if you're using one of,
Sure.
but like,
I cannot manage my own stuff. So like the fact that we
All right.
would try to manage anybody else's day-to-day engagement, but I do think we want to keep track of who's been talked to and if there are follow-up questions. So
Perfect.
certainly if you have ideas about, and we can follow up with the links to the 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute versions and maybe some suggestions about how you could use those going forward. And then even to Ann's point, we might suggest, hey, would you be willing to hold yourself accountable for 10 over the course of next 6 months? And if yes, please reply and say, here's where I'm going to start and I'll let you know how it goes. We can commit to that, but you don't need to clear it with us before.
You know, are there groups, are there communities, lawmakers that you've already identified where we could also be effective and have discussions?
I think that Ann's point about kind of crafting, for those who are interested, crafting a conversation together might be a good follow-up because I think
Okay.
each of you will have different. There is a lot in the.
Right.
There are a lot of proposals that Katrina went through. There are a lot of things that are in the framework that are not there, and then I think, as you noted, like some groups are just having different conversations. So that might be one where we can do a follow-up. Just to see what's most interesting. I would say if you're willing, like if we get invited places and you're willing to like partner with us on particular things, then that's always helpful to know too. Because if I get invited somewhere, like I don't have to talk all the time, like have a partner, right? That would be wonderful. So if you're willing to do that, I think that would be wonderful. And just let it, Katrina's team will follow up with like all of these things, and you can sort of work through her team.
Vice versa. If you would like someone from the state sub-cabinet structure to come with you as a resource to help answer questions, because like to Chris's point, when I go places, I am not an expert in all of these areas. And having others come with me to provide more than one voice helps with the monotony, but also just helps with the richness of the dialogue. So we are very willing to do that too.
Other thoughts? Seems like we're winding down, so maybe opportunity for thoughts. Commissioners, did you want to provide some closing remarks?
I'll again thank everyone for the good dialogue today, all the work that's gone into the framework, and this I think is going to set us. I love the enthusiasm, so I'm really excited about that, and to build on that to sort of engage on the framework as it is, and then continue to use this group to sort of sort through a lot of the things that I think we have yet to sort through, as it sounds like there's willingness to be a resource, whatever specifically that looks like. I said this we had a climate subcabinet meeting last week, and I think the inverse is true. The enjoyment of like, and the sort of real kind of energy that I think both the state teams and the council members got from being kind of mashed together, I think is really indicative of what can happen when you get excited about something and can push forward. And I think we can draw on that to kind of continue the work that is going. I know the state teams loved it, and I know this team loved it because it is, it's a hard problem. There's a lot that goes into trying to get to a net zero economy. but there's a lot of enthusiasm and creativity and innovation that we just once you tap into it, uplifts people and I think can be a platform with kind of go from to achieve the goals. So appreciate your time, all of your thoughts, and we look forward to work.
All right. Thanks everybody for your time. Just a logistical note, we did take notes today, but not for attribution, so we just recorded one. I believe we'll be sharing those out with all of you if you want to refer. And thanks everybody who joined us online. Have a good rest of your day.